So just so the students know, we have two of our staff members from NSF joining us as well, Chelsea Kennan and Randy Thompson. So with that, Randy, I'm going to let you do our opening.
Oh, well, wonderful. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. This is our first virtual Youth Security Forum. We have done one in the past, and then last year we got canceled because of COVID. And so we decided to try again this year, working with the school system to bring this to the students. And we've had five sponsors actually come up this year: the Chamber of Commerce, National Security Site, Ted Morris, Larry Struve, and Norm and Jan Ziamek, and they are all members of NSF, and they're all very interested in getting youth more engaged in public affairs and national security issues. And so they have contributed to this week's events to help spread the word of and educate you guys on some other stuff you might not be learning in the classroom. So we're thrilled to have you, and we're very grateful for our sponsors. I'll throw it back to Maureen.
Excellent. Thanks, Randy. So I'll wait for you to stop screen sharing, if you don't mind. There we go. Okay, so Matt, you get an intimate session with two of our students from AP Government. I assume the student, Gabrielle and Ibaya, you already watched Matt's intro video, is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Excellent, great. So with that, Matt, I'm going to let you take it from where you gave the amazing 10-minute introduction into what we're looking at and the challenges we're looking at with hacking these days. And so I'll let you give just a short intro, and then we can open it up for questions. That's okay.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, no, absolutely. By way of background, when I was in high school, I had this dual interest in computer science and political science with a specific focus on national security studies. And when I got to college, it was very hard to find a way to blend those two interests together. Typically, if you were a political scientist that had computer science skills, they wanted you working statistics and analysis and things of that sort. But also as a bit of a hacker, I knew my way around computer systems. I knew how to write code. I knew how to take things apart and figure out ways to make them work better or to fix things that were broken, and had a lot of friends in the hacker community. And when I was in college, I observed this trend that we were becoming increasingly dependent on technology. And, to think back, this is really even before the commercialization of the internet. So it wasn't about the internet, it was about our dependence on technology for telecommunications, for critical infrastructure, like I talked about in the intro video. And I realized from my skill set and my friends in the hacker community that technology was inherently vulnerable, and that created a new national security risk, that attackers, whether they be criminals or cyber terrorists or nation states, would be able to use these, what we were calling information warfare attacks, to impact the national and economic security of their adversaries. So I proposed that as a field of study and was actually denied in the early days. I was told that it wasn't a valid topic for research, but I persisted. And by the time I got to graduate school, it was accepted that this was going to be an issue, and I wrote my graduate thesis. Coming out of graduate school, I went straight to work within the Department of Defense as leading the first hacker team that was built that was able to go and hack classified and unclassified systems anywhere in the world for the DoD. Did lots of other interesting things at that same time around responding to some of the big national security events in cyberspace, and starting to work some of the commercial security issues around threat intelligence. So left doing work for the government to become an entrepreneur, helped build and start multiple companies, the first cyber threat intelligence company, a very focused red teaming company, and a terrorism research center that I operated for over a decade. Today, I still am very actively involved in cybersecurity. I provide direct advisory support to a lot of clients trying to solve really hard problems, as well as continue to advise the government, work in academia. I spent 14 years as a professor at Georgetown. This past semester, I joined the faculty at Columbia up in New York to teach on these particular issues, and also very hands-on at the community level, I'm on the Black Hat board, which is one of the largest cybersecurity conferences in the world that takes place right before Defcon, which is the largest hacker conference in the world. I've been actively attending Defcon now for about 25 years, so kind of have grown up in the industry. So my, day to day is really thinking about how these issues are changing, how our adversaries are going to innovate, what it means for our national security, and kind of how we continue to operate in this highly, technology evolved but still insecure world.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. So to our students, do you have questions for Matt, either about what's going on in the hacking and counter-hacking world, or about his career path and how he got to where doing what he's doing now, or some of the interesting things he's working on? So I'll open it up to you two. Gabrielle, I'm going to pick on you first.
Okay. Sorry, I was just thinking for a second. I just don't know too much what to ask, except for like, so you said Defcon was like a hacker conference. Is it's literally just like basically just a giant community of people who hack all across the world that come together for a meeting, or?
It is, yes. It's a unique event. So, I mean, it's technically a conference. It's very large. It's I think about 22,000 people, pre-COVID, and have been growing every year. And it really is hackers from all over the world. I think the last year before COVID, there were 70 something countries represented, and they all get together to share technical information, but more importantly, to network with each other, to make friends, to work collaboratively on solving problems. It's a very community centric event. So there are a lot of villages that are almost kind of like conferences within conferences. So if you have an interest in hacking, home automation software, there's a village for that. If you're interested in hacking Tesla cars, there's a village for that. If you're interested in hacking airplanes, there's a village for that. If you're interested in lockpicking, in social engineering, which is kind of tricking people into giving you information, there are all of these unique villages. It is also a place where they have kind of the premier hacker contest in the world. There's something in the community we call Capture the Flag. And that is basically that, some administrators set up a very complex network of systems that the Capture the Flag teams basically go in and compete against each other, exactly like it sounds like. They try and get flags on those systems by hacking into them. And once you hack into them, you have to defend them from the other hackers on the network that are trying to break in. So it tends to be, one of the best hacking competitions in the world. The winner gets a badge that is able to attend DEF CON for the rest of their life for free. So there's a lot of status involved with winning that contest as well. But it really is just this interesting community event that happens to have, conference taking place at the same time.
Okay, that's super cool.
It's a lot of fun. I highly recommend attending. It's in Vegas every summer.
Yeah.
Would you say that DEF
Nevada event? Sorry, go on, Abaya.
Would you say that DEF CON is more of like a personal fun thing or a business thing?
It definitely falls into the fun category for me, although you can learn so much there that it's great from a career development standpoint, or just making friends in the community that maybe would want to hire you, or, just having that general network. For me, having attended for 25 years, there are friends that, collect from around the world, literally internationally, that's the only time per year that I see them. So for me, it is a lot of fun. It's also become a family event for me. My 3 kids attend with me. My kids are 12 and 16 and 20. The 12 and 16-year-old attend the DEF CON Kids, which is basically the 18 and under version, which runs its own conference with its own speakers and its own Capture the Flag. And then my daughter has her network of folks. She's the 20-year-old that she goes and interacts with at the conference. So also, even if you're a family guy like me, where you want to bring your family and get them involved in the event, there's ways to do that as well.
And so what is the purpose of, how do the hackers community interact with these kinds of events?
Yeah, they're there as well. There's an incident response village, or they call it a blue team village, that works on sharing indicators of compromise. They study what's happening on the capture the flag contest, to see if they can learn things. So it's a combination of the entirety of the community, whether you work on the offensive side of cybersecurity or the defensive side. There's a place for everybody.
Fantastic.
And of course, the best way to understand from a defender's perspective is to understand how you're going to be attacked. So that provides a tremendous amount of insight, just being at Defcon and seeing what people are up to and how they're innovating.
So if you think back over the last 25 years, Matt, how has this community, the technologies, everything evolved? And where do you see things going in the next 25 years?
It's been crazy to watch the evolution of the community, but absolutely necessary with regards to the size and scale, just based on how quickly technology has become enabled, in society. If you think about it, and we talked about this in my intro video, we are completely dependent on information technology for our daily lives. And as a result, we have unique security requirements to try and make sure that we can use those technologies in a way that is safe and secure. So the community's seen unprecedented growth. I mean, I think the first time that I attended DEF CON, it was a couple hundred people. And now, as I mentioned, I think it's over 22,000 that attend. We have in the job market right now, according to an article over the weekend, 500,000, that's 500,000 positions in the cybersecurity field that are unfilled because we just don't have the talent that is, coming into the market to match the demand that we have for employment in the field. So it's been absolutely crazy, as has been just the development of the innovation in this stage. I mean, we have advanced intrusion detection systems, we have advanced malware detection. We had at DEF CON a few years ago a DARPA Grand Challenge, where students at different universities built AI systems that were engaged in autonomous hacking to kind of show what the future holds. So it's been very interesting from an evolution standpoint. When I look at where the next 25 years are going, it's hard to predict more than kind of 10 years out, but I can tell you we're going to be continuing to adapt based on the demands in the technology field in general. So if you think about what are interesting technologies we're going to be dependent on in the future, artificial intelligence is certainly a huge one. That's an area where I focus some of my attention right now. How do we make sure that AI is secure, given that we're going to be so dependent on it? And happy to go deeper on that topic. Quantum computing. A lot of what we are focused on from a cybersecurity perspective is using encryption as a defense mechanism for data. Quantum computing proposes to kind of disrupt the mathematics associated with encryption to kind of change the nature of how we're protecting things and what is at risk over the long term. Even if you think about technologies like virtual reality, if we become more immersed in those technologies, advanced communication networks, 5G and beyond, a lot of attention right now on cybersecurity around assets in space. We're going to be having, potentially manned missions to Mars. We have constellations of satellites that are going up on a weekly basis, where, low Earth orbit's becoming a very crowded space, but we've put all of these different sensors and communication technologies up there, and there's some security requirements around that. So really what you'll see in the cybersecurity community is the field adapting to the pace of change from a general technology perspective.
Excellent. Thank you. Gabrielle, you had a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to, could you maybe go like farther into encryption, like in the math that's associated with that? I don't really know anything about it.
Sure. Typically today, from an encryption perspective, we're securing data or securing communications. We're using what is referred to as asymmetric or public key encryption, where you have two keys that you're able to communicate with. And it could be that you have those two keys and you're using a software like Pretty Good Privacy, or it could be stuff that's being generated automatically for you in the browser or being generated in real time if you're using something like Signal Messenger or Wicker or something with built-in encryption. And really what happens is that you have a public key and a private key. And the public key is something that you put out there that is a really big prime number, typically. And people encrypt the messages to you using that public key, and only your private key can read them. So it really is focused, at least today, or the stuff that we've done to date, focus on being able to factor these really two prime numbers, and it takes one to decrypt the other, and vice versa. If you sign something with your private key, your public key would be able to verify the signature. We've been dependent on the protection around that type of encryption technology based on the compute power associated with the supercomputers that exist, right? So if we think about even just identifying, but then trying to factor prime number pairs to try and crack those keys, it becomes very computational intensive. In fact, it would take, some of the supercomputers in use today, decades of time in order to hack those. As we move towards quantum computing, what happens is you're having the compression of those mathematic problems into what could be considered almost near real time, weeks to potentially months to instantaneous for some of the smaller key sets. So that is leading us to think through, okay, maybe I'm a government and I encrypted my secrets using technology 5 years ago, and I want those secrets to be encrypted for the next 25 years. Well, if quantum computing comes along in the next 5 to 10 years, I'm going to miss that window. My secrets are going to be able to be decrypted. So now there's a lot of focus in the community on how do we create quantum proof encryption technologies. So really at the end of the day, when you think about encryption, you need to couple it closely with mathematics and advanced mathematics, and where you see increases in computational power in supercomputing, you can make the assumption that it's going to impact the world of cryptography as well.
Excellent, thanks. Randy, did you have a question?
I actually have a couple. Hi, Matt. So I do a newsletter for some clients, and I'm tracking what's happening in the cyber world. And I've got a couple of things for you. First, I'll start with something that's a little more closer to home. How concerned are you with smart light bulbs, smart cameras, smart homes, smartphones that can hear you and then say, oh, do I need to dial 911 for suicide prevention, which I've had people say has happened on their phones. All of these things in our home environment that are watching us, that are tracking our moves, and how hackable is it easy to hack a camera? I mean, we've seen those videos of babies, on the Nest camera, and how people have come in and taken that video. So the more we get Internet of Things, the more we turn to smart stuff, are we also getting more vulnerable?
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of the issue is that we've decided, as consumers and as the companies that are building products for consumers, that security is not an element of what we want to pay for. And usually that's around slowing down the development cycle or the rush to market. When you think about the internet connected thermostats or light bulbs, there's a real rush to be first to market and get that mass adoption. And as a result, they rush these technologies out without thinking through the security model appropriately. Oftentimes without an adequate way to update those products and make them more secure as vulnerabilities are discovered. So we basically made some of the same mistakes that we made when we commercialized the internet out the gate and didn't think through the security model with the Internet of Things. So those devices tend to be, potential for compromise, especially the ones that have I would call it kind of a shorter shelf cycle, products that come on the market and go off. So, less about your Hue light bulb and more about the random Zigbee bulb that you picked up at Home Depot that's no longer manufactured. The issue being that we bring those devices home, we put them on our network and they're connected wirelessly, and they typically are on a trusted network. So if they get compromised, it could provide inroads into your network behind your personal router or firewall. The same thing happens with these security cameras. We've seen where there's been, 500,000 to 1 million security camera devices that were just openly accessible on the internet that had a vulnerability that not only were they hacked and the video could be compromised, but the attackers actually used the bandwidth that those computers, those cameras were connected to. So the bandwidth at your house, and here at my house, I have gigabit fiber, so I got pretty good bandwidth. They coupled it together and used it to launch what we call distributed denial of service attacks against other targets. So basically flooding websites and other internet connected technologies with 500,000 to 1 million cameras that were on good bandwidth with, all sorts of packets that were taking those services offline. So this is a huge issue. We need to start demanding as consumers that security is important and that we are willing to pay, whatever it is, 10, 20% more, that we're willing to wait a little bit in the market to buy an internet connected light bulb until somebody releases one that has a pretty decent security model. And then where we do have those technologies deployed, we need to be thinking about how it could potentially impact us. For example, in my home for smart devices, and you can see, a Hue light bulb behind me. I love being able to change the color to blue when I'm on these conference calls, video sessions. But I run a segmented network in my house for those devices. It's a separate Wi-Fi system that I call ToasterNet, which is a play on a paper I wrote over 25 years ago called Information Terrorism, Can You Trust Your Toaster? So, I've incorporated that humor into my own house, but I've basically have treated these devices as untrusted devices. So I want to take advantage of the capabilities that they provide, but I'm not willing to have them be connected to the same network as my personal computer or, some of the critical devices that might be here in my home office.
I definitely think that's part of the conversation that's missing, and when we talk about all these smart devices. So another question is, we all see on TV the PC-matic ads and all these advertisements for security systems. I mean, the governments and businesses have deployed a plethora of really sophisticated data security solutions. And yet cybercrime continues to grow. I understand it's in the tens of billions, if not close to trillion before too long. The hack of the Colonial Pipeline was just recently made the news. So it seems like we're having a hard time detecting the criminals. I guess it seems like the criminals are just one step ahead of us. And do you see a way of ever catching up with them?
Yeah, so I mean, what you speak to is typically something that we refer to as, attacker innovation. They're highly incentivized to innovate, coupled with something that we call the defender's dilemma, in that I have a very large attack surface that I need to defend, and an attacker only needs to find one chink in the armor in order to target me potentially successfully. So we've made a lot of great advances from a defense perspective. A lot of the cases that we see in the news are where, given the pace of technology and how complex some of these environments are, that the hygiene of those networks and those systems is not on par. So for example, maybe they haven't updated the operating system or they haven't updated the antivirus, and the attackers find those holes, they find those ways to exploit it. So where you make mistakes. So the technology has advanced, but you have to have great implementation of the technology. You have to have great hygiene. You have to be updating on a very frequent basis. You have to be disabling elements of the software that, represent a security vulnerability that you're not going to use. That said, in my career as a red teamer, I've engaged in over 1,000 red teams against some of the biggest targets in the world, DOD, 8 of the top 10 banks in the world, the largest social networks, oil companies. And we had a 100% success rate because time and innovation were on our side. So we were able to successfully target whatever entity we were going after and achieve our means if we had the time and the resources, in order to do that. So what does that mean moving forward? It means that we're going to need technologies on the cyber defense side that augment the capability of the humans that are working as the defenders. So here maybe is the role for AI as well, or at least machine learning and data science. We're going to need, new approaches to how we harden and build some of these devices. We need a change in behavior where there's more accountability if somebody operates a network that is insecure or hasn't patched systems, and that's used to potentially, cause harm or impact the safety of the people that are using that technology. And again, similar to the IoT side, we need to make sure that we're using the power of the purse and our purchasing power to reward those companies that are deploying secure products or providing frequent updates. We saw a little bit of that just a week and a half ago. The Biden administration released an executive order on cybersecurity, and some of the things that they are recommending is that the government will now use its acquisition power to try and force industry's hands in building more robust and secure products, in understanding the origins of the code that they're building, making sure that they're going through vulnerability testing as part of the software development lifecycle. So hopefully with changes like that and being able to take advantage of technology on the defender side, we'll see an improvement to kind of at least develop some parity with the attacker advantage.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Matt. Really helpful discussion, and I'm glad you referenced the executive order. I'm going to ask our two students, since you are students in AP government, do you think that executive order, or what do you think governments can do to counter the issues that we're dealing with cyber hacking? So, Abaya, I'll start with you. Maybe.
Sorry, I'm thinking. Give me a sec.
That's okay. No problem. You can think.
I feel like executive order could do something, but it can't always guarantee that it's going to work, because there'll always be people who won't comply with what, quote unquote, the leader wants.
Yeah, that's a good point. Executive orders also can be reversed when a new executive comes in. Gabrielle, what are your thoughts?
I think the executive order, it'll work for a lot of the people who are like more on the left wing, but I think like a lot of Republicans aren't going to like this, because they're going to think that they're getting told what to do and it's not their choice, and that or their security isn't up to them. I think that might be a problem, but I think it's definitely necessary that we instill some sort of national security, like not quota, but just standard for the industry, just considering it's so all over the place. And that's just what it seems like from what we've heard today. So, yeah.
No, that's a good point. Matt, coming back to that, I mean, what does make, you talked about, the hackers have the advantage of only having to find one chink in the armor. We have, as government entities, we have a limited number of tools in the toolbox. How do you put teeth behind the executive order, and what's the industry's perspective on this? Do they want these types of enhanced security to really come into existence, or are they still kicking and screaming and trying to avoid doing it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different areas to unpack there. The executive orders tend to have some significant teeth, because they require from the executive branch that agencies partake in particular behaviors or actions. So it's a little bit more than releasing a strategy or a white paper. They're actually, in the executive order, there are timelines and demands and things that must be done. So this, has some meat on the bones with regards to that. Again, though, as discussed, it's all about the implementation. That's been a commentary of mine for over a decade. In fact, we talked about Defcon. The founder of Defcon's a good friend of mine named Jeff Moss, and he and I and two colleagues wrote a paper a decade ago that was published in the Georgetown Journal as a peer-reviewed paper, where we use the title "All Done But the Coding," review of the national strategy for securing cyberspace, where we make the argument that we've had the same strategy, the same aspirations for over 20 years, but what we haven't had is the implementation. So it's like being an entrepreneur with a really good idea for new software and then not writing a single line of code. So what we need out of this executive order is people to start writing lines of code. So there are requirements that are in there. around, the civilian agencies, cybersecurity that I think will be good. And there are forcing functions within the private sector as well to make sure that their systems are more secure when they're selling to government, right? That's a clear distinction. This executive order is really not going to influence what companies do, what Microsoft builds to sell to other companies. What it's really going to impact is the Raytheons of the world trying to sell software into the government, or these big technology companies trying to sell software to the government. So we're going to be increasing the security standards around that software. Negatively, when you have those types of requirements in the government around purchasing behavior, it can be contrary to being able to adopt innovative technology. So we've seen that in the past where maybe somebody wrote a great piece of software in the commercial world, but they don't meet the government security requirements. So they decide not to sell to the government, or they can't sell. And then as a result, we as taxpayers pay hundreds of millions and sometimes billions of dollars for a contractor to write that code. And what we see is, 5 to 10 years later, it becomes legacy code and we're paying a ton of money to maintain it. So I do get worried if we jump too quickly into this, that we'll carve out, a significant ability to bring innovative technologies into the USG based on these new requirements.
So the power of the executive order then is really in the executive branch, the president being able to regulate, or to not regulate, but to mandate what federal agencies can and can't do. And then the hope is that if, big companies like Raytheon and Boeing and others who are selling hundreds of millions of dollars worth to government change their ways, then they will draw the rest of the community with them. Is that correct?
That's it. Or that, the government is such a large market that the companies will start to adopt more secure practices in how they build their software in hopes that they'll be able to sell it to the government. And I think that's really the end state. And we have something in the security community that we call DevSecops. And that is basically, when you think about traditional code development, we call it DevOps. All we're trying to do is, as people are writing new software, building new technology, that they're thinking about security as part of the design process and as they write the code. Too often, and I like to joke, that security investment looks like a Pac-Man, and the body of the Pac-Man is the pay later, and the mouth opening is the pay now. It's much cheaper to think about security early on than to think about it later in the life cycle. But time and time again, we see companies not making the investment because it slows them down, because it introduces a little bit more cost in thinking about security. And what they're really trying to drive with one element of this executive order is that companies start to think about security as part of their code development process. And that'll be beneficial. There's a lot of other things that need to take place as well, though. I mentioned Jeff Moss with the paper that we wrote, the hacker that started Defcon. We spent some time looking at textbooks, and samples of code in textbooks are not done from a security perspective. So new students are learning how to code without thinking through the security. So could there be an initiative that would be fairly low cost to update the code snippets and examples that are put in textbooks? The same thing when you do a search on Google. Is there a way that we can prioritize the search results that actually show how to develop that, the software library or algorithm that you're looking at in a more secure manner? So there's things that we need to do at kind of the base level to establish a new capability to build secure products on a move forward basis.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that. Brian, welcome. Glad you could join us. Can you tell us, where are you at Reno High as well?
Yeah.
Okay, and are you in AP government?
No, I'm in just regular government.
Okay, great. Welcome. And are you a senior?
Yes.
Excellent. And where are you headed next year?
UNR.
Excellent. Good. Well, we're having a very interesting discussion with Matt, so I'll give you a chance to listen a little bit more and then see if you have additional questions. So Matt, when we talk about industry adopting standards, this goes to some of Randy's questions about how do we get ahead of the curve. You know, obviously you can only do so much with executive orders, you can only do so much with regulation. And you said there's you know, a sort of cost incentive not to have security in. It's sort of pay now and then you know, figuring out what to do later. Is there a way that we can, or are companies really embracing these changes?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that are impacting it. One is that a lot of these companies are recognizing the risk that cybersecurity poses to their businesses. I mean, ransomware has really kind of leveled the playing field because it's a bit indiscriminate in its targeting. It's looking for vulnerable systems and people that have a dependency on the data and files that are stored on those systems. And then there's the economics around the cybercrime with ransomware. So it's gotten a lot more companies that would maybe think, oh, cybersecurity isn't that important to me. Nobody would target me. I'm not that important. It's gotten them recognizing that they could be a potential victim. So that general awareness is helping in the marketplace for certain. The other piece of it is around the liability potential here. We're starting to see, you know, some interesting dynamics around if I put a system on the internet and it hasn't been updated for 3 years and somebody hacks it and then uses it to attack you through a denial of service, you know, and takes your bank offline or whatever it may be. What is my liability for that? If I write software code that, you know, is incredibly insecure and I sell it to you and there's a potential issue, what is my liability? Right now, with the software in particular, we have these what we call end user license agreements that basically say you're not allowed, you know, to you know, go after the developer of the software for anything that happens to you. And some of them are very interesting. If you look at some of the Microsoft products, it says you cannot use this for air traffic control or management of nuclear facilities, right? They even say you can't use it in these particular circumstances. One of the things that I think with this executive order, you know, to get back to it and some of the movement forward is to start to remove some of those liability protections that people are just building into licenses and saying, no, you know, you are going to have to incur some liability for the code that you develop if you're selling it in the market. I assume liability if I build a car and I put it in the market and it has, you know, a severe deficiency that impacts public safety. I think you're going to start seeing that on the software side. Liability speaks to boardrooms, you know, better than any financial incentive that I've ever seen. So I think as we start to see this increase in liability coupled with the realization that anybody can be a victim or be impacted by that, I'm hoping, you know, over the next decade that it's going to drive more robust security behavior.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's nothing like the threat of a good lawsuit to get behaviors to change. So we have a question about quantum computing. Can you talk a little bit more about how, you know, the basics of what it is, how it functions, and how it could actually help us develop more security in the future?
Yeah, so I'm not a quantum computing expert by any means. So, you know, you'd probably get more, a better response by doing a good Google search. But really, you know, as I understand it, what happens with quantum computing is that we move from what is typically a very sequential processing behavior. In that, you know, when I'm looking at these large primes, I'm looking at one, looking at another, looking at the combination, is it the key, looking at one, looking at another. With quantum computing, what you do is basically open that space up to kind of be parallel, where I can contemplate millions or billions of potential solutions all at once. and that changes the mathematic dynamics, in
Mhm.
particular around encryption and around supercomputing, in general, particularly around kind of advanced science requirements. If you think about genome or biological analysis or things of that sort, it has the potential to be very impactful in those spaces as well, or anything that could benefit from large scale experimentation, as part of the innovation process by moving it from that sequential to more parallel processing type capability.
Yeah, actually, the fundamentals of quantum computing are based in the uncertainty principle. So our computing mathematical formulations right now are binary. They're based on, is it 1 or is it 0? And in quantum mechanics, you have uncertainty. And so you're able to capture all of those possibilities, that are not just 1 or 0 at the same time. And as a result of that, you can essentially do massive amounts of computations of a certain type in parallel. And that means that things like breaking encryption is one possibility, but also we also have the possibility of being able to compute much more. Okay, we had another student just join us. Hassan, you just joined us?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. And can you introduce yourself? Tell us your school and your program?
I'm from Reno High School. I'm a senior, and I'm doing this program for my AP Government class of hacks about cybersecurity in America.
Great. Well, sorry you weren't able to get on earlier, but this is being recorded, so you can catch the earlier part of the discussion later. And you're a senior. Where are you headed?
To UNR for a federal degree.
Fantastic.
Great.
Wonderful. So Matt, back to your career path, because we've got students that are headed out. They're seniors. They're going to various universities. How do you advise the next generation? You've got 3 of your own, some of whom are following you in your footsteps. What do you say to them about career paths, interesting areas to get involved in? And in our case, how do they tie and weave those kinds of pursuits with national security?
Yeah, I think the key lesson for me over the course of my career has been to don't let people narrowly define how your different interest areas fit together. I mentioned early on, back when I started, computer science and political science were seen as, non-aligned at the national security space level. But I could see an alternative future, and I pursued that, and I didn't take no as an answer. So I would say look for those areas where you can combine different fields that are of interest to you or that you have passion about, and use that creativity and the imagination that you have around how those fields might come together to kind of help drive your career path. As we get more established in our fields, I think we start to suffer from a lack of that imagination or an understanding of how things were, not where they're going. And the new entrants in the field, I think, can really play a role in helping us identify where change is going to happen or where things are going to be mashed together to create new solutions or to represent new risks that exist out there. So that would be my number one career advice is don't think too narrowly. Don't think outside the box. I always encourage people to think without the box. Think about the art of the possibility here.
Excellent. Thank you.
Well,
Randy.
good question, Matt. Do you see more innovation in government or in the private sector at this point? Because you've got, like you said, the executive order coming out that's trying to push the private sector. But do you see some innovators in government that might be pushing security more than the private sector?
Yeah, typically the innovation that we see is in the private sector. There are exceptions to that. Special research programs in the U.S. government tend to help push technologies for which there's no established kind of market perception. Great example of that is just DARPA in general. I mean, DARPA gave us the internet and GPS, and I think even the foundation for some of the vaccines that we're using against COVID right now. You have that in the U.S. military, where they have some of these, SoftWorks and AFWorks and these kind of advanced collaboration entities, or even an Intel community focused venture capital firm with InQtel, where they're looking for solutions that they can provide funding for which maybe traditional VCs or the perception of the market just doesn't exist yet. So they're willing to see a little bit further down the road. But typically, outside of that, we see most of the innovation happening in the private sector, and the U.S. government being a purchaser of that.
Yeah, and even in those examples where you said DARPA, which is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and InQtel, the spinoff from the intelligence community, those are entities in the government that are funding innovative and cutting edge research. But the people who are doing the innovative and cutting edge research are not government entities. They're typically private companies, or their universities, or their other organizations. So
the nice thing is, with DARPA, they can set up these challenges. I mentioned the Cyber Grand Challenge. I mean, I went into that event at Defcon with pretty low expectations, and I was a bit blown away because I felt like there was this great leap that took place with regards to autonomous hacking capability. And there were some very interesting things that happened as well, just from an AI perspective. One of my favorites being that these systems were set up where I think it was 6 finalists, after a 2-year-long competition, all on stage. They had created an isolated network. So the systems were just on there with the infrastructure that they needed to target. And even for scoring the contest, they were burning it to a Blu-ray, and there was this robotic arm that was like picking the Blu-ray up and moving it over to a network where it could be displayed for the audience. And I remember quite distinctly that one of the autonomous attackers actually cheated and started early. And I think it realized that there was a benefit to starting early and no penalty. And so it was, autonomous enough to say, I was told to start at noon, I'm going to start at 9 a.m. And even the folks that wrote the software didn't understand exactly what in the programming had caused it to make that decision. So very interesting things just coming out of this advanced research and this innovation, and driving the universities to say, again, what is the art of the possible, and just go and work on solving this problem. We see that innovation and these challenges take place in the private sector as well. There are hacking contests for cybersecurity. There's all these bug bounty programs that exist. There are things just from a data science perspective, famously the Netflix recommendation contest, where they opened it up, I think, with $1 million prize to whoever could write the best recommendation algorithm for I like Till Street Blues. Tell me what other shows I'm going to like. So I really like it when we take this kind of, we'll provide funding, we'll provide a contest, but just go and try and solve this problem using approaches that we haven't seen before.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you, Matt. And for our students, thank you for joining us. And for those who didn't get to join us live, I hope you're enjoying watching this video. Thank you, Matt. We really appreciate your time and contribution to this. And we wish all of our students well in their future endeavors. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Excellent. Take care.